Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are happy to see you, at least virtually. My name is Annie Black. I am the Director of Programs and Volunteers at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to let you know that we will have plenty of time for questions at the end of tonight's program. So I want to go ahead and recommend that you locate your Q&A button. If you're on a computer, it will likely be at the bottom of your screen. If you are on a tablet or other mobile device, it might be towards the top. So anytime you have a question tonight, please go ahead and type it into that Q&A function, and we will save those up for the end of the program. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Mary Pat Higgins, President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Mary Pat?
Thank you so much, Annie. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, Texas Upstander, The Life of Héctor P. Garcia. I'd like to start by thanking our community partners for this program. We sincerely appreciate your ongoing support of the museum. Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square, Legacy Senior Communities, Mosaic Family Services, Reach of Dallas, SMU Human Rights Program, Temple Shalom, Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission, and the Family Place. I'd also like to give a special welcome to our museum members joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your continued support. We couldn't do programs like this without you. And as always, I'd like to give a big thank you to our board members for being such amazing champions of the museum. I know several of you are joining us tonight, and I appreciate that. Before I introduce tonight's program, I wanted to take just a moment to make a special announcement. Hopefully you know that today is North Texas Giving Day, an 18-hour online giving event designed to empower you to give back to your community and support local nonprofits. A gift of any amount to the museum today will help continue to allow us to bring programs like this to you free and have them be accessible for all. If you go to the North Texas Giving website, you can search for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. So go to northtexasgiving.org and consider donating today. We're excited that we have an anonymous donor who's generously agreed to match all of the donations up to $10,000. And so your gift will go even farther if you give today. Thank you so much for considering your support. So tonight, we are pleased to present a program as part of our Permanent Exhibitions Highlight Series, which provides an in-depth look into different parts of our permanent exhibition. Shortly, we will hear about Dr. Héctor P. Garcia, an incredible upstander who is featured on the Texas Upstander wall in our Pivot to America wing. Tonight's program also coincides with Hispanic Heritage Month, which began on Tuesday and honors the cultures and contributions of both Hispanic and Latinx Americans. We are so honored tonight to hear about Dr. Garcia from someone very close to him, his daughter, Cecilia García Akers. Cecilia is a physical therapist and the daughter of Dr. Héctor P. and Wanda F. Garcia. She's the founding member of the Dr. Héctor P. Garcia Memorial Foundation and serves as its board president. Akers published her first book, The Inspiring Life of Texan Héctor P. Garcia, in 2016. And should we all be so lucky as to have a loving daughter tell our story? We will have time for questions at the end of tonight's program. As Annie mentioned, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions. And now I would like to turn it over to Cecilia García Akers.
Okay, hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with everyone this evening, and I will admit that this is a first for me. I'm used to speaking to live audiences. This is really different, and excuse me if I may flounder a little bit, but we're so happy to be here. I am also so honored to be here and talking to you about my beloved father, and I hope that you learn some new things about him because he really had an inspiring life. I want to provide you a little background on him first. He was a Mexican immigrant. He immigrated to Mercedes, Texas in 1917 with 3 other of his siblings and his parents. His parents were educators in Mexico, but their credentials were not recognized in Texas. So they opened a dry goods store in Mercedes, Texas. The dry goods store provided them with, a good income, and they worked very hard. And all the children went to school in Mercedes. However, they went to segregated schools. So my grandfather, Jose, he spent the evenings taking those children into the basement of the store and taught them English, history, government, a lot of Roman history, a lot of Greek history. So my father was very knowledgeable in that. You can understand the name Hector. He gave all his children historical names. So I think this was a very important part of his life and his teaching his children everything. So they grew up in Mercedes. They worked very hard in their store. They did have a lot of problems. I think that store had been burned down twice in a fire. We don't know exactly how that happened, but we heard that the Texas Rangers had something to do with it. So they did lose their store twice. He grew up. He went to high school there, and I think the first incident where he would know that he was going to have a very difficult life to achieve success was when his English teacher told him that as hard as he tried, Hector, no Mexican would make an A in my class. And as hard as Hector tried, he ended up with a B. So he knew then what his life was going to be like. Plus, I'm sure that he and his siblings experienced a lot of difficulty growing up there in Mercedes. They worked hard, like I said. He graduated from Mercedes High School, the top of his class. He was the valedictorian. He then went to UT Austin, got a degree in zoology, graduated from there, the top 10% of his class at UT Austin, which was very difficult. And then he got accepted to UT Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas, where he graduated in 1940. Now, what is so remarkable about his education was that when he went to Galveston, they accepted 1 Mexican a year. And that was him in 1936, 1 Mexican a year. So he gets through medical school and tries to get an internship in Texas, and lo and behold, no hospital would accept a Mexican for medical school training for an internship in Texas. So he ends up in Omaha, Nebraska at St. Joseph's Hospital, Creighton University. That's where he ended up for his 2 years of residency in surgery and general medicine. So he did that. I was fortunate to go to Omaha some years ago with my father, and they told me some very interesting things about my father, how he was really, everybody really loved him. He was just very nice. And they did tell me a funny story that, I never knew, because Papa never, ever talked to us about his struggles. But they did tell me that he showed up in Omaha, Nebraska, with snow all over the ground. And they asked him, they said, Dr. Hector, where is your coat? And he looked at them, and here he is from South Texas, Mercedes, where they never see snow. And he told them that you people don't know what cold weather is really like here. Like he really knew, which he didn't. But they told me that they realized later that he didn't own a coat. But this was a good lesson for me, because he took a negative thing in his life and turned it positive. He never dwelled on anything. He knew he was going to have to adapt to the horrific weather conditions in Omaha that he wasn't used to, because he had to finish school. So he did. He was there for 2 years in Omaha. He finished. He got his training, and then he got called to active duty to go to World War II. And what is interesting, I had to research his life and all his medical records and all of his records in the military to find out more about my own father, because he never said anything. But one of the things I found out was that in his separation papers from the Army, it said in there that he was a year older than he really was, and that he was born in Texas. So what happened was he became a second lieutenant right away when he got into went to World War II, because he had joined the ROTC program when he was 15 years old. And I can assure you exactly what happened. He showed up, he was tall, good looking, very handsome, very smart, talked a lot, and they asked him, "How old are you, Hector?" And he said 16. And they said, "Where were you born?" And he said in Mercedes, and they accepted him. But I realized that he lied about his age by 1 year, because he really wanted to get in the military. He loved the Army. He was trying to escape poverty. They had 10 children, 7 survived. And out of those 7, 6 of those children became medical doctors. 2 of them were women. Dr. Cleo and Dr. Dahlia were both medical doctors. And then he had other brothers that were medical doctors. So out of 6 children, they'd become medical doctors in a time that they didn't allow Mexicans in medical school. This was really remarkable, really unheard of. And it gives us inspiration, really, I think, to continue to seek out the best education that we can, because if they made it back then, I think that he's really an inspiration for all of us. And so this is a very good thing to tell our children, how he navigated through an educational system that was certainly established to go against people of minorities. So he made it through there. He went to World War II as a second lieutenant. Shortly after, he requested an upgrade in his status to captain, which twice they wrote him back and they said, we're sorry that we lost your application. So did that stop him? No, he went back and applied again. He finally became captain. What was very interesting, when he first got to World War II, they said that they were going to court-martial him because no Mexican could be a doctor, number one. And so he had to present his credentials because they put him in the infantry. And he said, I am a medical doctor. I need to be in the medical corps. So they were going to court-martial him for lying and all these horrible things. And then they got his papers and they said, oh, you belong in the medical corps. So then they put him in the medical corps. And so he traveled all over the world, taking care of soldiers for this country, and North Africa and Italy and different parts of the world, and he was head of a MASH unit, surgical MASH unit. And, he did very well. And he did tell me a story one time that he was in a MASH unit, and guess who shows up? General Patton. General Patton comes up to him and looks at him and looks at his name tag, and it says Dr. Héctor Garcia. And General Patton says to Dr. Héctor Garcia, what medical school in Mexico did you graduate from? And my father looked at him and said, the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, sir. And I asked my father, I said, Papa, what did he say? He said, nothing. He just looked at me and walked off. So, I mean, I think he surprised General Patton here, who was running a MASH unit, and he was, a Mexican in the Army as a physician. So he did that. He met my mother in Naples, Italy, when he was stationed there. Met and married my mother in 1945. And he came back to the United States in 1946. He left my mother there in Italy, in Naples, and where my oldest sister was born, in Naples, Italy. And researching my book, I wondered, why did he leave my mother there? And I found out, researching my book, that he took care of all these soldiers for 4 years, and he was not even a U.S. citizen. He was not a U.S. citizen. He got his citizenship November 7th, 1946, after he separated from the Army. So this says a lot about a person who was an immigrant and fought for this country for many years, took care of soldiers, and he was not even a citizen. So when I hear negative speaking about immigrants to this country, it really angers me, because both of my parents were immigrants. And I think that, you know, we need to look at people individually, understand, you know, what's going on in their lives, but he did. And so he comes back to the United States, sets up military practice in Corpus Christi, medical practice in Corpus Christi, Texas, with his older brother, J.A. Garcia. And he has a contract with the Veterans Administration. And so these soldiers are coming back, and he listens to their plight. He was really a good listener. He really was. And they told him, Dr. Hector, I can't find a job. I don't have any money. He can't get an education. And one of the things they really could not get was adequate health care. So he had this contract with the VA, and he saw these returning soldiers for $3 a person. So he listened and listened, and he thought, you know, I have to do something. I have to do something different to help these soldiers. They were coming back, and they needed help. And so the Army wasn't listening to them, and he decided to found the American GI Forum, which was in March of 1948. Well, on the founding of the American GI Forum in Lamar Elementary in Corpus Christi, Texas, over 700 veterans showed up, 700. And you have to remember, he didn't have email, he didn't have, you know, access to the communication benefits that we have today, but he got 700 people to show up, and he started the American GI Forum. So when it was established in 1948, it was really set out to help veterans and their problems and healthcare, getting a better healthcare and better benefits. But shortly after, in 1949, the Felix Longoria affair happens. And Felix Longoria was a private that was killed in the Battle of Luzon. And he was from Three Rivers, Texas. And I'm sure many of you have heard this story. And there is a very nice documentary about this. And also Dr. Pat Carroll wrote a book called Felix Longoria's Wake, and very detailed historical analysis of what happened. But basically, Mrs. Longoria goes to Three Rivers. They have one funeral home, Rice Funeral Home. And the director there, named Tom Kennedy, she goes to see him. Now, it was only Tom Kennedy and Mrs. Longoria in the room together. But from my understanding is she came out, she was very upset because he denied her the use of the chapel to wake Felix's body. And so she didn't know what to do. She didn't live in Three Rivers anymore. She lived in Corpus Christi. So she heard of my father, and she went to see him. And of course, if you didn't know him, but you can imagine what kind of temper he displayed when this happened. So he gets on the phone and he calls Tom Kennedy, who admits to my father, it's all documented, that they do not let Mexicans use a funeral chapel because all they do is get drunk and have fights, and the whites wouldn't like it. So my father, of course, is very, very angry. He fires off 17 telegrams all over the country. One was to the President of the United States, one was to the head of the Army, and only one person responded, and that was newly elected Senator Lyndon Johnson, who wrote in a telegram that it's documented, it's there at A&M University, who houses all my father's papers, that he said that he could not do anything against a private funeral home. But if Mrs. Longoria approves that, he will have Felix's body interred in Arlington National Cemetery, which she did choose that. And he was the first Mexican American that was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So that was a historical thing. Also, this put my father and the American GI Forum on the national map and started his civil rights advocacy for not only for veterans' rights, but for civil rights, voting rights, education rights. This put him on the map. It was historical, and it was in national press that Texas wouldn't even bury their own because Longoria was from Three Rivers. And, if they had buried him in Three Rivers, he would have ended up in a segregated cemetery that, unfortunately, the fence was put up by Felix's father as a job. So who would want to go there? So they buried him in Arlington, and this really started a movement, a national movement. This is the way things were in the United States. So this put him on the map. My father worked very hard for 50 years of his life to ensure benefits for veterans. And then he started, he was very smart because he knew how the system worked in this country, and he worked through the system to get things changed, to affect change. And he worked with 5 United States presidents. And, at times I wondered how he was able to do that, but they did listen to him. They did listen to his advice, what was right, what was correct, how to help people. And I think he just came along at a time in our lives, and this country really needed someone like him. And the veterans all thought that he was put here for a reason. And I think my father really thought that too, that he was put here for a reason. So that's kind of how he got started. And he worked and worked through John F. Kennedy at the beginning. John F. Kennedy gave him some very important positions, like signing of treaties. And then, of course, after his assassination, Lyndon Johnson and my father, they had known each other from the Longoria affairs. So they had a very rocky relationship. My father would go to Washington and tell President Johnson off. If he didn't like something, he would have meetings with him. And they had some pretty hard fights, but my father always respected President Johnson and tried to work with him to make sure everything was going to come out the way my father thought it was. So he effected change in this country. He was able to, I think maybe, he did so many things, but I think the most important thing to me was how he desegregated the schools in Corpus Christi. Because once he got that done, many school districts followed suit because he had taken me around. They had poor teachers. They had poor teacher ratio to students in those schools. They were just pathetic. You would not be able to send your child there. You just would not. So that battle with CCISD lasted 8 years. 8 years. And my father was so hated for what he was doing because he really wanted those children to be taken care of. And he proved through the court system that they had built schools to further segregate Mexican American and Black students away from Anglo students. He proved that in court. So after 8 years of fighting, the judge finally ruled in Cisneros' case against the CCISD. And one of the things that I'll never forget, because I was fortunate to work with my father for 10 years in his office, was I took a call one day, and it was the superintendent, Dr. Dana Williams, which they called him Dirty Dana. They had T-shirts made with his picture on it. And, he was not a very nice person. He didn't care about these students, and he didn't want to change anything. But that day, when the judge came down with the ruling, he calls my father at his office. And I answered the phone. I told my father, Dr. Dana Williams is on the phone, wants to speak to you. So here my father goes into his office and closes the door, and he comes out, doesn't say anything, of course, me being the nosy daughter and wanting to know what the heck was going to go on. I asked him, what did Dr. Dana Williams want? He said, he wants me to come down and help him because he doesn't know what to do about desegregating the schools. And, I looked at him, I was shocked, and I went, to me, it was shocking because here they had this public battle in the media, on the radio. Papa had said Dr. Dana Williams had to go. He just shouldn't be there. And he said, yeah, I'm going to go help him. He doesn't know what to do. And I was amazed how my father could put all of that behind him because he got what he needed and he was going to make sure it was done correctly. And that's how he could put things behind him. All the hatred that I think at that point in his life, all the hatred that came towards him, like in order to establish JAFFORM chapters around the state, they had to hide him in the trunk of his car because Texas Rangers were looking for him. They wanted to stop him. He was not liked, and he would travel going to do the JAFFORM business by hiding in the trunk of his car. He was so hated. We had death threats to him and his children and dead snakes in the mailbox. And we had to get an unlisted number. We didn't have any friends. I had one friend in school, really. He was a close friend of mine. And, we lived in an all-white neighborhood. And, this just did not go well. It really did not. And sometimes I wonder how I turned out as good as I did because I was really surrounded by all of this for all of my life. But I think this desegregation of the schools really, it made people understand that he was really there to help others and make sure everybody was treated equally. And the tide against him started to turn in a positive way. He was the go-to person. He was the person that people would ask for help. Many times people would go into his office asking for help. They had discrimination practices against them in schools, and he would take the time to help them. And in traveling all over the country, when we give lectures about him, there was one notable young man that came up to me and told me, Cecilia, I want to tell you how your father helped me. And I said, okay. He said, I got drafted to go to Vietnam, and my wife was expecting her first baby. And I asked the Army, could I please be delayed because this was our first child and I wanted to be with her. Of course, the Army told him no. So he was on his way to go to Vietnam. And the young man's parents came to my father and told him the story. They just wanted their son back for the birth of their baby. I don't know who my father called, but in 1 week's time, that young man was coming back to Corpus Christi for the birth of his daughter. And, I think that he took the time to help people, whatever they needed, he was there for them. He would take time out of his medical practice, which was pretty hard for him. He worked 20-hour days. He would make hospital rounds. He was on the phone. He would send patients out that needed specialists. He was very good about that. He had big fish tanks in his office filled with guppies, like hundreds of guppies, so that the kids, when they came in waiting for their parents, they could look at the guppies. And, he never turned anyone away. And I think that he wanted to take care of people. And if they couldn't pay him, he didn't care. He would see them anyway. And sometimes they would bring him Mexican sweetbread, tamales. Somebody tried to bring him some live chickens one time, but my father turned it down and said, no, my wife wouldn't like it. So they tried their best to compensate him, but he wasn't into make money as a doctor. He really wasn't. He was there to take care of people. You know, he had the poorest of the poor patients. So they were very ill. Some were chronically ill. Some didn't know what to do. They didn't have the education that they need and to take care of their chronic conditions. And he took the time to tell them what to do and if they had to go to the hospital and they couldn't pay, he would give them the money to get admitted, $100 or whatever it took to get them in the hospital. And he was just down the street from the county hospital, and where he spent all his time, and also the end of his life was there at Memorial Medical Center. So that's a kind of special place for us, and because he practiced there, and I got to go on rounds with him many times, almost every day when I worked with him, and see how he treated the nurses and the patients. And I can really assure you that everyone really loved him. They thought that he was a kind person, which he really was. He was very kind, and I think this is what we miss today: the kindness in our nation, and understanding there are people who are different from us, look different, have a different skin color, have a different educational level, have different sexual orientation. There are people that are in poverty, and you know, everybody needs help. Everybody needs understanding, and I think this is what we miss today. And if he was here with that pandemic, the COVID-19, he would be there taking care of people, making sure they were taken care of one way or another. He was good at educating his patients and making them understand how they needed to take care of themselves. And I think he was a pioneer in that. He also had a radio program that he would go on and talk about diabetes, tuberculosis, infantile diarrhea, just things that were very prevalent at that time, but he would get on the radio and do it on a regular basis. So I think that he is someone that we all need to really look up to and study and understand that we had an incredible person with us. And probably at the time, even me as his daughter, I didn't know it. I didn't understand until much later. He was really a special human being, very, very, very important. I think his legacy lags behind really the public's knowledge of him and what he accomplished. 50 years of his life. All of his documents are at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And what's remarkable about that is that, he saved everything. So when he donated his papers, you're not going to believe this, but there are over 7,000 photographs and 700 linear feet of documents that he saved from the 40s, and talks about civil rights, American GI form. He did things very simplistically, and he would take a copy of the newspaper, he would buy 3 copies, and he would go with a felt pen and mark and catalog what he wanted in his collection. And he had little young students there that would catalog everything. So it's very interesting. They do have a portion of that digitized on their website. You can look now at pictures, historical pictures of things, to share with your family, and to understand, educate yourself, understand what one man did. I think probably all of his acknowledgments and his awards that he received in his life were incredible. But the most important one, I think, was when he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Ronald Reagan in 1984. He was the first Mexican American to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And we have a clip on my foundation website that has it in its entirety. And just to see his humility, and we were so happy to have been there and witnessed it. And that I'll never forget that. Just to see your father receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he sat on the same table with President Reagan, and they were chit-chatting, and you know, and to have a Republican president recognize him, I think was probably the most remarkable thing, because, you know, he worked as a Democrat all his life, and you know, it was just a tremendous time. He had so many honors. One was from the Pope, Catholic Church. You know, he was a very devout Catholic. We all went to Catholic schools all my life. I went to Catholic schools, I had Catholic education. I'm very involved still with Incarnate Word Academy in Corpus Christi. I was on their board of directors until I had to transition off, because, you know, you can only be on there 6 years. So that's what happened. But we donate to them. And one very, you know, very kind thing is that one very kind thing that he was their personal physician of the sisters out of Incarnate Word. And he would take his little black bag to the convent and take care of those sisters that needed help. They were sick, and he never charged them one penny, not 1 cent, in the many years he took care of them. So I think they were always grateful to us, and they're always happy to see us, and our relationship is good and strong. And I always go back to that, because getting to see him work the way he did with patients kind of brings tears to my eyes, because you just don't see a doctor like that anymore. So I'm almost through here. I did want to remind you that if we have one person we can look up to, it's him, my father, Dr. Héctor P. Garcia. The way he lived his life, the sacrifices that he made to help not just Mexican Americans, but all Americans. And I hope that in your heart sometime you'll purchase one of my books, Inspiring Life of Texan Héctor P. Garcia. It was something that was dropped in my lap in 2015. They felt that there was a his story needed to be told. So I gave it from my daughter's perspective about his struggles, and, you know, the end of his life, and the death of my brother, his namesake, and just things that really affected him to be the person that he was. But all in all, I think that he knew he was put on this earth for a reason. And, you know, I could sit here and talk to you 2 weeks about him, and, you know, I still couldn't cover everything. But I think this is a good start. And I hope that you will learn from him and learn about him and really research him, because I think his life is very worthy to learn more about him.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. That was wonderful. As you just said, I'm sure we could talk for much, much longer, but we have some great questions coming in, so I want to make sure we can get to those. Before we actually dive into the questions, I wanted to share a comment from Commander Lawrence Guzman Romo, who's the current American GI Forum of the U.S. National Commander. He wanted to thank you, his friend Cecilia, on her presentation about the giant legacy of her father, Dr. Héctor P. Garcia. I just want to read the rest of his note, because I think it's important for all of us to know, but he says, we're still advocating for our military veterans, civil and equal rights, and educational access. For example, they're the lead organization advocating with the U.S. Army for Private Marcelino Serna, a Mexican immigrant, the most decorated World War I soldier from Texas, to posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. Congress has authorized the American GI Forum to recommend that his service record be reviewed for the Medal of Honor. He clearly deserved the award, but was told he was too low of rank. He also couldn't speak English well, and was a Mexican immigrant, so he didn't receive. Yeah, my thoughts exactly. And his last note, which I think is very sweet, is that Dr. Héctor is looking from heaven proudly on everyone's effort right now. So I wanted to share that from Lawrence Romo, just for you there. But our first question comes from Patrick. He wants to know what happened to your dad's practice. Did another physician take it over? Did it close? And has it been declared a historic landmark?
No, unfortunately, Papa was not, did not plan for the rest of his life very well. And no, my mother had to close his office when he went to the hospital for the last time in February of March of 1996, and she had to close it. He didn't, you know, I had talked to him about getting a young Hispanic doctor to take over, because A&M wanted him to lecture there. They had an office there, they had a secretary, they had a desk. I told him, Papa, you really need to do that because students need to learn from you. And he said, I just can't think about that. And so unfortunately, you know, that was a really, and I talk about in my book, unfortunately, that was a big mistake. He couldn't think of doing anything else but working as a doctor. And when she closed that office, that really, I think, kind of hastened his death because he knew he was never going back. And I think he always had hope of going back and taking care of patients, but that just didn't happen.
Thank you. Yolette has asked if you can talk a little bit more about the significant political organizing your father did to elect Presidents Kennedy and Johnson and later Mexican Americans to Congress and state legislature.
Well, you know, he was a trailblazer, and he started the Viva Kennedy clubs. And if you know that American GI Forum was strong in Texas and Illinois, and that's where Kennedy got the most of his votes, and that's what put him over the top. Very slim margin, but he did win that election outright. And he started by the Viva Kennedy clubs. And he did it nationwide, and he met with Bobby Kennedy at the time, and he asked my father, how can you help me? How can you help us win the election? And my father said, I think I can deliver 90% of the Mexican American vote, and he got 84% of it. So that's how he got started. And you know, and my father broke down barriers for young Hispanics, men and women, to run for office and get elected. Anybody who wanted to run for office, they would go see him in his office. They knew they had to get his blessing and also his advice on how to win elections. And my father never ran for office. He didn't want to. He wanted to work behind the scenes. It's kind of like what I do, work behind the scenes. I'm never going to run for anything, but I want to make sure that the right people get elected. And this is what he did. And everybody went to see him, but he broke down barriers. He always promoted high educational level for people, you know, and if he had not broken down those barriers of segregated schools, many Hispanics would not have been able to become doctors or go to law school or be physical therapists. I mean, that it just would have never happened if he hadn't taken the time and the efforts to break down those barriers. Remember, they took one Mexican a year in 1936, and that was him. And so, you know, and Cleo, she went into Galveston, but Dr. Hico and Dr. Dahlia and Dr. CP, they went to medical school in Mexico. So they, you know, it was still a struggle for Hispanics to get educated. So he broke down those barriers, and if it wasn't for him, they would not have gotten elected because he knew exactly how to work the system.
Thank you. We have a question that's asking if you ever went to Italy to meet your mom's side of the family.
I did. I went to Italy. Boy, you know, that that was a wonderful trip. I got to meet my grandmother. Now, my mother brought her over when I was born, and she stayed in Corpus Christi with me. And when right after I was born, she stayed for over a year, and then she went back. We only went back twice. And it was a lot of fun, you know. I mean, they just, you know, fed us all the time, and we had it was such a good trip, and everybody in Italy was very kind. And we went to Rome, we went to Florence, we went to Venice. We traveled all over the place, and we stayed in this little villa on the second floor, and it was fun. And we were right on the beach, so we would go to the beach every morning. And Celli was the name of the little town that we stayed in, and all the family went. My father even came up. You know, we were there the whole summer, but he came up for about a month in Italy. And you know, he spoke 5 languages, so he knew Italian, he knew English, he knew Spanish, he spoke a little bit of Russian. You know, he just picked up languages very well. And you know, he worked in the United Nations for three months or more as a ambassador. He was ambassador to this country, the United Nations, and he made history there he was a representative of the United States, and he gave a speech to the General Assembly on nuclear weapons, but in Spanish. So he gave this, and I asked him, Papa, how did you give this speech in nuclear weapons? And he said, well, the staff there, they research everything, and then he translated, and he gave that speech in Spanish to the General Assembly. And I think if I remember correctly, the next day the Russians said that no American speaks any language other than English. They thought he was coached and prompt. And here he was really the first Mexican American appointed to the United Nations as a representative. So he also was the first one on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He was the first on a lot of things.
It's amazing he found the time, even working 20 hours a day.
I know.
I have one more personal note I wanted to read before we get back to a couple of questions, just because I love them coming in. We have a note from Héctor Flores, who actually spoke for an event for us last week. Hi, Héctor, good to see you. He said he met Dr. Cleo and Dr. CP over the years and recalls visiting your dad at his office. Héctor Flores worked for the Office of Civil Rights in Dallas, DHHS, because of the discriminatory assignment policies and practices at Nueces County Hospital. That's why he met your dad. He said he would call me Tocayo because I'm named Héctor also. So he just wanted to share that he has great respect and admiration for a great Mexican American leader and legend. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you, Héctor. We have a question from Melissa, who's asking how was the American GI Forum different from other veterans organizations at the time, or was this kind of the first of its kind?
Well, they have a congressional charter, and my father was a trailblazer, and I think what was unique about them that they started with veterans services, veterans rights, but then a year later they went into civil rights, and it kind of works together. If you're a veteran and you can't find a job, your rights are being violated, you can't get an education. So I think that's how it's different. He expanded in different areas of this country to make sure that they were taken care of, and I think him as a leader, as leadership, he just one wonderful thing about my father. You couldn't tell him no. I mean, if someone told him no, he would find a way to go around that no until he got what he wanted. Yeah, but people were, he was nice to everybody, but people really had deep respect for him. If you knew him, you really loved him and you wanted to be around him. And if he treated you, if he teased you and everything, he really liked you, paid attention to you. But I think him as a leader, he was just able to get so many things done.
Yeah, sounds like it. Putting us all to shame a little bit. But Maria is asking, what would be your advice to immigrants based on the example your father set?
Oh gosh. Well, I would say right now it's a very difficult time. I do think that we need to make sure that they're taken care of. I think this DACA thing needs to be handled. And I don't know when that's going to be. We cannot close our eyes to what's happening. And immigrants are a vital part of our country, our history, our community. I have many patients when I go into their homes to do home health. Many of them don't speak English, but you have to give them the respect. They don't have to speak English to live here. And I know lots of them are here and they're not citizens. I know they've come over at some point, but I take care of everyone and I don't judge them. And I just think that we have to, I'm just going to say this. We have to have the right people in office. And your congressional leaders and your senators, you have to elect the right people, because we cannot continue to close our eyes to the way people are treated, putting children in cages, giving hysterectomies that no one knows anything about, You know, I think it's just cruel. You know, I think it needs to be investigated. I think something needs to be done. And you know what? If something isn't done, we need to get those people out. They don't need to belong there because they're supposed to represent all of us, not just one type of person, because this is why we're in this country. And, you know, both of my parents were immigrants. So I feel very strongly about that. And look at both of my parents, they were both immigrants, and look at what they achieved in their life. And you just can't take people and turn them into thieves and whatever else you want to call them, because they all belong here if they want to be here, and they need to be taken care of. And that's my philosophy on that. And, you know, and the fact that there are people in government that want to take away health care from 20 million people. That is morally wrong. That is wrong, because they need education, they need help. And I can assure you, many of the patients that I go see, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to take care of their diabetes. They are not educated. You know, many doctors are too busy to educate them. This is where I come in. And people need health care. They need to be able to see a doctor on a regular basis and take care of the problems. And, you know, an early death is not an option.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions. One question that I wanted to ask is, you know, when you were growing up, because you mentioned there were threats against your family, so you had a certain amount, you know, awareness of, were you really aware of this kind of amazing work your father was doing? I mean, did he talk about it with you all, or did it sort of come later that you realized the scope of it? What was that like growing up?
Well, you know, he decided to build a house in an all-white neighborhood. That did not go well. I remember very vividly taking my little bicycle around the block, and these kids would run out of their houses and spit on me. Because of who he was. I mean, you know, we dressed nice, we were educated, you know, we took good care. I mean, this was not an issue. They did not want us there. And he was so hated, you know, and unfortunately, this is the way it was in Corpus Christi, and I'm sure all over Texas and many parts of the country. But I would think that the thing that I learned is when he came into my room when I turned 16, and he says, "You're going to the office with me." And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do there? You know, I was like, oh no, this is not good. This is my birthday. You know, I'm going to go party. I'm going to go do something with my friends. Oh no, I went to the office with him that day. And from that time on, he taught me how to take care of patients, how to take blood pressure, temperature, history on patients. You know, I helped him for 10 years. And that I realized later, that was the only way I was going to know him when I went there, because he was so busy. He was not at home. He would come home for dinner, then he would leave, and he would go to the hospital, and he would call people at midnight, 1 in the morning, making sure they were doing what they were supposed to do, like the people that were helping him in the American GI Forum and senators and legislators. He would call them at 12 or 1 in the morning and bug them, you know, I mean, from the hospital. And he would go make his rounds. This is the way he operated. But I'm always grateful that he took me to the office that day. I really am.
Well, Cecilia, I think we're about at time. I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I do hope everyone will go check out your book and learn a little bit more about your father. I know I'll be doing that as well. And of course, if you haven't been to the museum yet, we hope you'll come see us. Cecilia, we extended the invitation earlier, but also everyone watching tonight to come see our Pivot to America gallery, our Texas Upstander wall, and see your dad up there as well. So thank you again, Cecilia. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Stay safe, stay well, and we will see you next time. Have a good evening.
Everyone.